Alright, hello everyone, welcome back. I'm pretty excited because this week I got the chance to go hands-on and play Monster Hunter Wilds. Now, as far as I'm aware, this build is the same one that people saw last week during Gamescom. I myself had about 90 minutes in total with the game. The first 30 or so was playing through a story mission that acted as a brief tutorial, as well as introduced a few of the new mechanics, such as mounted combat, weapon swapping, and collecting objects from afar. And then after that, they booted up a later game save in which I more or less got to free roam, do some hunting, and explore the map, and that's what I'll be showing you here today. Now, a couple of things to get out of the way first. For starters, apologies for the quality of this footage. If I had my way, it would look much better. However, unfortunately enough, we were just pretty limited in our capture ability during this event. I will say though that in person, running at 1440p and not viewed through YouTube's compression and lower bit rates, the game just looks much better. Also, we were playing on a PlayStation 5, and the game will presumably look even better played on a PC. The second thing to note is that I am coming to this from the perspective as someone who's played and really enjoyed Monster Hunter World, but is far from an expert in the franchise. I know there's people out there who have been living and breathing this series for decades now, but that is not me. I am a newer fan. I loved World, and I am pumped for Wilds, but that's the baseline of my experience with this game series. Okay, so let's talk about what I saw, right? First thing, there was character creation, although that was quite limited in that there really wasn't much to do in terms of creating a character. Rather, we got to select from one of 12 different presets. Now, I was assured that this was demo specific, and come full release, the game will have the wide range of customization options that we expect. It simply wasn't there, wasn't ready for whatever reason in this demo. So I picked the look of my hunter as well as one for my palico, and off we went. Loading in put us directly in base camp of the Windward Plains. This is the mountainous, desert, and plainsy region that you will be most familiar with if you followed this game at all. Up until recently, this was in fact the only region we'd ever seen footage from, although not too long ago we got some showcase in a trailer of the forest region, which is the second zone. So they dropped us in, and immediately we were given one simple objective, and that was to hunt an alpha doshiguma. Now, we were told that these travel in packs, it's best to split them up if possible, and then our handler gives us a few items to help with that very task. Now, before leaving camp though, I hopped into the tent, which is where you do your customization of your loadout and prepare for a hunt. This includes things like changing out your equipment, selecting both your primary as well as your secondary weapon, the primary being the one that you initially carry on your back, and the secondary your mount carries, and you can swap to use it whenever your mount is around. You also pick your gear set. I went with the Doshiguma set. It's like all the scrap metal with loads of fur kind of bursting from the seams. Looks super cool. In fact, I'll just add here, all of the armor sets in this game look absolutely dope. They have nailed the design and the look of this armor that we can don. Same goes for the palico as well, because you do pick palico equipment, both the weapons as well as the armor. I too gave my palico the Doshiguma set, and it's just hilarious on this little guy because it makes him look like this tiny little lion with the fur pulling out of its mane. I love it. It looks so good. Lots of charm and quirkiness. It's part of what I loved about Monster Hunter World, and that has absolutely made its way here into Wilds as well. Also, in your tent, you can barbecue grill meals, which I did, cooking myself up some basic meat that provided boost to health and stamina. Capcom continues its tradition of fun cooking animations in their games. The only negative here is that every time I watch these, I actually get legitimately hungry. Also, here you can find an items menu. This lets you transfer, craft, and sell any items, as well as customize your radial menu. So after setting myself up, picking my equipment and that of my palicos, I left the tent and took a brief look around the base camp. There were several stations here set up for the various crafting and vendor NPCs, although none of these appeared to actually be available in the demo. I specifically stopped by the blacksmith Gemma and got a message where she said that she was still setting things up. I saw similar things from other vendors in the base camp as well, so I left camp and took off towards my main objective. Now, in the process of leaving the camp and making my way into the hunting grounds, you'll immediately notice that there was no loading, and this lack of disconnect, this lack of separation, is one of the big updates in Wilds, the fact that it is one cohesive, seamless world, rather than the previous disconnect going between being in town and then starting a hunt. Now that transition is done so with 0 loading screens. You just go whenever you're ready. It's also my understanding that this seamlessness will be extending into the entirety of the game's open world from zone to zone. The only time that you should be seeing loading screens will be for story missions, when there are cutscenes that pop up, or when you happen to fast travel. But otherwise, Wilds is promising to deliver a big open world with entirely seamless exploration, and from what little I saw, they've absolutely delivered. I just love it, and it really adds so much to the immersion. Even if it is just the difference of a lack of a single loading screen from camp to a hunt, it makes the world feel more cohesive and more immersive as a result. So leaving base camp on the back of my mount, another big standout feature is the fact that your mount just goes all by itself. If you happen to have a pinned objective or a target, your mount will automatically run towards it. Now you can take full control whenever you want, slowing, stopping, or redirecting where you want the mount to go, but if left to its own devices, the mount will auto run, essentially following what would otherwise be your scout fly trail directly to your target destination. So after about a minute or so of riding, looking around, and picking up objects from afar with my slinger at a distance, we then found the Alpha Doshiguma traveling in a pack through these sand dunes, and then at that point the hunt began. So let's talk about combat. Gameplay feels as good as ever, although I'll add the caveat here that prior to playing this demo this past week, it had been at least a year since I sat down with Monster Hunter World, so I'm pretty bad at the combat. We'll just put that out front, okay? I did at least remember True Charge Slash for my greatsword, so my main focus was just trying to get as many of those out as possible. I managed to get a few solid hits in, enough to eventually kill the target, which, hey, that's about all I can ask for. I think I even landed 1 or 2 shoulder charges, so I'll pat myself on the back for those, deflecting some damage and then following up with an attack. That was cool. But anyways, yes, the combat feels great, just as good as it did in World to me, and I look forward to improving and getting good myself. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the franchise, Monster Hunter is very much one of those games that is focused on heavy animation locking. That's the kind of action combat that we've got. The whole idea is that you are meant to learn the different monsters' moves and attacks, and then use any windows of opportunity that you get as your chance to strike and do damage. This game really punishes frequent spamming of attacks or poor positioning. If you overcommit, the monster is going to run you over or slam you into the ground or eat you or do something. However, the more that you play, the more you will learn, and then you will learn when the proper time to strike is and how long your strikes take, what ideal strikes to use at any given moment. This can be a little frustrating at first when you're new to the series, when you're new to fighting monsters. It becomes so satisfying the more you play as you progress and improve and learn these fights and learn how and when to strike. That's when it all kind of clicks and comes together. So the greatsword gameplay felt about the same as I remember from World, working my way up to the True Charge Slash, going through those 3 tiers. Also, you know, you got the wide arcing slashes, kicks, the shoulder charge, and all the combinations in between. There might be some new moves in here as well, but as mentioned, I'm really not familiar enough to know for sure. One big new inclusion though is the addition of focus mode. Now, I wasn't sure what to think about this feature when it was first revealed, but after trying it in action, I gotta say, it's great. It's essentially a targeting mode that lets you directly place your attacks. On top of that, it also reveals any weak points on the monster that you're fighting. So when you enter focus mode, you'll get a reticle that pops up and the monster will glow in the spots that are weak, and then you can further target and damage those areas. On top of that, while in focus mode, there's a special focus attack that if you hit, will do bonus damage to any weak spots. So for the greatsword, this focus attack would sort of kind of drag the blade along the monster's body, which made it pretty easy to hit the weak spots. It actually, anytime I used it, I pretty much guaranteed to hit a weak spot. Now, beyond striking the weak points though, I also found focus mode to just be super useful, as it lets you redirect any charged attacks with longer animations. So when I would be in the middle of a True Charge Slash, which takes quite a way to work up and quite a bit of time to charge, you could flip 180 degrees around to a target that moved behind you and still land your strike, which was super, super helpful. But besides attacking with your weapon, there's all sorts of other tools at your disposal in combat. You've of course got your slinger and various types of ammos that you can toss out. This can be used to damage as well as distract monsters, but there's other functionality as well. During my second hunt of a Doshiguma, I went after a basic one. I caught them traveling in a pack of 3, and we were told at one point that you can split them up, which will make it a lot easier, and the default suggestion was to toss out these large dung pods into the pack, forcing them to flee in separate directions. I did this a few times and it was super effective. But there's other ways to split up the pack as well, including a host of environmental traps and obstacles, things like hanging rocks and vine traps, or if you happen to be fighting on sand dunes, for example, any big impacts that land and can cause those dunes to collapse. Now, this actually happened early on when I was hunting the alpha. We were standing at the peak of one of these sand dunes, and then the Doshiguma, after this big strike came down, started sinking in the sands, and you could see it kind of struggling to get its footing. It was super cool to see, but essentially also works as like a bit of crowd control, snaring them in place. You also have things like large barrel bombs that you can place down. You can pick them up and throw them to deal bonus damage, and there's just a bunch of other stuff, including your palico. This thing helps a lot. It's not just like a cute little pet that follows you around. It's actually useful. So as you're fighting a monster while you're on a hunt, your palico will chase them around, smacking it a few times, dealing a little bit of damage with its weapon. But it also comes with a ton of utility. So for example, when your health gets low, oftentimes they will bring you a healing item so long as you relatively stand in place. They'll also do things like lay down traps. Now, unlike World, where the palicos would just meow as they did stuff and you might get a little text notification, in Wilds, they straight up just speak English to you. Now, I thought this would be annoying, but in practice, palico chat is not only not bad, I think it's a great addition. Really, the biggest thing that it brings is extra cues for when it's doing helpful stuff, like the fact that your palico now shouts when it lays down a trap. Mine did this in the middle of the fight. It placed down a shock trap, and I may have missed that happened had he not shouted, "Shock traps down and ready." That extra audio cue, beyond having a visual one, is a very welcome and great addition as far as I'm concerned. The other big new inclusion is the mount. Now, this isn't only good for traversal, but it helps you quite a bit in combat and just preparing for combat. So as mentioned earlier, your mount will auto run towards any target that you have while you're on a hunt. And while it's auto running, this lets you do other stuff in the process. You can pull up your map, you can check your inventory, you can look around for resources and collectibles and pull them towards you with your slinger. You can also sharpen your weapons and heal yourself while mounted. But then there are plenty of directly combat related benefits. So for example, you got a few basic attacks while you're on the back of the mount. It's far from your full suite of weapon abilities, but you can do a few strikes. So there is a basic mounted attack where you will slash your weapon in a small little combo. Then you also have a dismounting attack with its own animation that sort of lunges you forward and strikes. And then on top of that, from what I could tell, you can dismount by jumping off, and then you can follow while mid-air from that jump with a falling attack. So again, there's a few ways you can strike from the back of your mount. Then of course, as mentioned, there is the weapon swapping, which seems super useful. Even just the fact that it gives you access to a ranged weapon on demand is very nice. This lets you, while you're mounted, swap to a ranged weapon and shoot the monster while you're chasing it to do some extra damage from a range. But then also the fact that, hey, this game has weapons with different damage types, and then the monsters that are susceptible to those types of damage. And really, this is going to open things up at all the potential for the very skilled portion of the player base. I didn't try this much myself in the 60 minutes that I played because frankly, I'm only at all familiar with the greatsword, but I did at least occasionally pull out the ranged weapon to shoot the monster while I was chasing it. Also, the mount can be called whenever and wherever, and this is awesome. While you're in the safety of base camp, yeah, you can pull up your mount, but also while you're chasing down a boss, while you're running away, in the middle of a fight, it doesn't matter. Anytime that I tried to call the mount, I was able to, and it appeared almost instantly, scooping me up from behind at full speed. Funny little addition though, when your mount's coming in, sometimes your palico will ask if it can bum a ride as well, as if I could say no to the palico. It just happens. But again, Capcom does such a great job with these games of adding a little bit of charm all throughout, and that was a nice little instance. I noticed it as well. Okay, so eventually fighting the Alpha Doshiguma, I take it down. It took me like 15 minutes. A few notes from that point forward. When you finish a hunt, you're going to get a quest complete screen that pops up. It lists your rewards, your completion time, but also it is seamless. You just stay in the game. No longer does completing a quest, completing a hunt load you out anywhere, because the whole game is seamless. So this continues. So after I completed that quest, I rode around for a bit on my mount, kind of looking around, collecting resources, checking out the environment, seeing the endemic life, of which there was a lot. I gotta say, this game feels a lot more full and a lot more alive. There's just all sorts of monsters and creatures everywhere, all over the place. And eventually, as I was going around, I came across another Doshiguma. This was a non-alpha, just a regular one. I engaged with him. After laying a couple of strikes, it popped up a new begin quest that appeared, and so I fought that regular Doshiguma. This was a much quicker encounter, but but still by no means a cakewalk. Like, it took some work and it hit me quite a bit, quite often. Yeah, I got my butt kicked, okay? Let's just say, I told you I'm not very good at this game, but I do really enjoy it. But yes, it was a lot easier than the alpha, and I did eventually take down the regular Doshiguma. I then spent some time just checking out the map and menus and walking around. I gotta say, from what I saw, this map, just the playable space, is way bigger, as big as ever, and as mentioned, completely seamless. You walk right out of camp, you go straight into a hunt or into exploration, whatever you want to do. It was broken up into various themed sections, so there was like the grasslandy area with some plant life and water. There was the arid desert region with these rolling sand dunes, and then there was this more craggy, jagged, mountainous area of the zone as well. The map is massive for being a single zone, although traversal time might not be that much different from what you saw on maps in World, simply because you have that huge speed boost on the back of your mount. But even though going from like one end of the map to the other might be about the same, hard to tell, but it could be, the overall play space and the overall hunt space is way larger, which should mean a lot more variety from one hunt to the next, as there's just way more surface area for you to be doing a hunt on. It's still very much a Monster Hunter style of zone design, so they've continued using the numbered areas. I suppose this could be super useful for multiplayer callouts. We can be like, hey, the boss is in area number 5 or whatever. It just seems a lot more expansive than what I remember from World. In fact, I counted in total, there were 17 individually numbered areas within the Windward Plains alone. Now that second zone, the Scarlet Forest, which was revealed recently in a new trailer, that connects directly into the first zone. So basically this connection, I was told, happens in the section of the map with the river, which is pretty close to the base camp. In that area, it starts to visually transition from that arid grassland deserty region into the foresty one, and then you can see the forest off in the horizon. Now I saw that while I was exploring on a second character. I made another one, went through looking around, and I saw that region, and I was told that the transition from these zones, that is seamless as well. So you can run from the plains directly into the forest with no loading screens, although it is likely that access to that area will be gated behind some story progression. Once you unlock it, you'll be able to seamlessly go from one section to the other. You've got access to a 3D map that has absolutely everything worth noting on display. It's got the location of the bosses, of endemic life, of plants, the camp spots, the bases. I'm going to assume some, if not all of this, has to actually be learned or tracked before it is displayed on your map, but I'm not sure. It was all there from the get-go for us, as we were clearly some ways into the game at the point that the demo began. There's an environmental overview. If you filter through the map, it'll show you things like the time of day, the current weather conditions, and active monsters. It also shows you events that are currently happening on the map. So when I looked, that included upsurges in the environmental traps of giant boulders and vines. There was a location with frequent localized lightning strikes, as well as a paratoad outbreak, and apparently there are going to be many more than these types of events that can be occurring at any given time. In fact, on the map, they even had like a forecast of potential future changes. So that would display the upcoming time of day, as well as potential weather conditions, along with the likelihood of certain types of monsters showing up on the map. There was a note in this forecast section though that said player actions may change the forecast. So apparently there are things that you can do that will at least likely change what monsters show up, but maybe you can change the weather conditions or the time of day. That seems unlikely. But some other stuff that I noticed while playing that I thought was pretty cool, the dynamic weather system, super awesome. Right as I started hunting the Alpha Doshiguma, one of those lightning dust storms rolled in, and I mean quite literally rolled in. This big sweeping burst kind of took over the landscape, immediately changing it from the previously kind of hazy to this lightning strikes coming down everywhere. It had a big impact on my fight as well. There were several points where lightning strikes actually hit the Alpha directly, stunning them and probably dealing some damage, I'm not sure. The storm itself, I counted it, by the way, it lasted roughly 9 minutes in total from start to finish. Music in the game is on point and does such a good job of enhancing the exploration, but specifically the combat. Really, the big thing that I noticed is that the music appears to be quite dynamic and will be responding depending on the events that are happening during a hunt, like accentuating certain points. It was just really, really cool. The territory fights, otherwise known as turf wars, those are of course back. While I was hunting the Doshiguma, this freaking like massive lightning infused dragon thing showed up, kind of swooping in, attacking the Doshiguma. They wrestled for a little while and I took advantage of this by hacking away at my target. Oh, also the base camp and other camps that I explored just has crazy level of detail. It was so impressive for what is like a relatively makeshift establishment. The base camp in this region had a lot of nice little touches in each of the vendor stations, and the whole thing just breathed a lot of life. There's a lot of life and character, things that establish what feels like a fully realized world in this game. Really appreciate it. They've done a great job. Those pop-up camps, those can be built in select locations around the map, and here you can manage equipment, you can cook full meals, you can also fast travel between those locations, and they act as carting or respawn points. There was an SOS feature where you can call in other players, but if players aren't available, you can call in AI teammates, which is cool. And then lastly, I briefly scrolled through all the menu options, and here's what I saw. There was an items and equipment section, which gave you a crafting list, let you check your item pouch, your field pouch, as well as customize your radial menu and get info on your equipment. There was a missions and quest tab. There was an info section, which is where you accessed your map, got info about your palico, as well as a play guide, which I presume is tutorials. And then there was a communications as well as a chat log that you could check as well. Frankly, I'll say it's really hard to get too much of a sense of things in such a brief window of time, especially with a new game. For as similar as this is to Monster Hunter World, things just really blow by quickly. It doesn't take very long for a 90-minute play session to be over just like that. There's a lot of info to take in all at once. But even from what little I saw and from what little I was able to play, this just seems like such a nice evolution of Monster Hunter World. I am so looking forward to playing more. I will add, it always feels a little strange for me to cover a game like Monster Hunter. You know, games that have such a long standing that I've only mostly followed from the outside. As mentioned earlier, World was my first Monster Hunter game. Now, I loved it. I played over 100 hours, but even that is like barely scratching playtime for many longtime fans of the franchise. So even with 100 hours, I still very much feel like a beginner, and I have zero context to the rest of the franchise, to all of the other games. But all of that said, yes, I quite enjoyed World. I think very highly of that game, and from just the tiny slice of gameplay and time that I had with Wilds, this looks like such a wonderful evolution and improvement to the formula. The combat feels as good as ever. I love how much more expansive the world is, the fact that it's all completely seamless, and the new additions with the mount, with the weapon swapping, with the range collection, the storm system, the time of day changes, all of that. So much of this is really well done. I am very excited to see how the whole thing and how it's all pieced together. Monster Hunter Wilds cannot come soon enough. And with that, we wrap up today's video. Thank you as always for watching. Hope you enjoyed this. Again, it's really hard to get a full picture on such a small amount of time playing a game, but I really liked what I saw, and I can't wait to play the whole thing. Thank you, as always. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time.